Welcome to Iron and Ceramite, Librarius Omnis, where we explore the depths of the Black Library.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this episode of Iron and Ceramite present Librarius Omnis. This is our show where we take the in-depth look at the books from within the Black Library. My name is John, and joining me as always is Shane. How you doing, mate?
I'm all good, thank you. All good, looking forward to this one.
Yeah, me too, man. So if you've been following us so far and you're up to date, you'll be well aware by now that we've started this series with just a small ambition of reading and reviewing the entire Horus Heresy. For those who listen in podcast form, you won't be able to see, but for the benefit of you guys on YouTube, you'll notice our layout slightly different today. We've got some visual aids to help us through. And also, if you look along the border, you'll see little title cards for all the other shows that we have. The YouTube exclusive Archaeotech Assimilation and Hobby Bashing, and then of course our podcast where we have the other guys, Dave, Tommy and Glenn, join us every other week and we talk all sorts of Warhammer goodness. So enough admin talk, we'll get to what really brings everyone here today, and that is the next installment, and that would be when the technology wants to keep up with me.
There we go.
Legion. So do you want to catch us up, Shane, for where we join Legion?
Yeah. So we're a few books into the, we're a decent chunk into the heresy, right? We've done various bits and pieces. We've seen, Horus's Fall from Grace, with like the opening trilogy, as it were. We've seen the Flight of the Eisenstein, barreled through Fulgrim, which was a nice view of Primarch and a chapter's descent to chaos, and we find ourselves with Legion, which is a really different book in comparison. I did miss one. I of course forgot about the Dark Angels, but as I said, where we're introduced here is to a very different chapter of Space Marines. And what's interesting about Legion is that it's not so much a book about Space Marines and Space Marine chapters. It's more a book about the humans and the Imperial Guard, or the Astra Militarum, and is much more written from a human perspective, like a soldier, and the confusion and I suppose mayhem of being caught up in the middle of a galaxy-spanning conflict that you've almost got no concept of how big or small you are in. And we are introduced to the chapter that is the Alpha Legion, which is obviously what this is named after, but they are themselves a chapter kind of shrouded in mystery. And what we see from this is almost like this book's more like a Cold War spy thriller. It's more like espionage and spy games than straight out bolter porn, as it were. Or even like just even going back to the Dark Angels book, Descent of Angels, like the forming of the Crusade and martial conflict. It's much more of a kind of gritty, in the weeds, detailed kind of view of how war might be waged in a more, I suppose, pragmatic, thoughtful, and undercover manner, which is interesting, because for the Alpha Legion themselves, and it mentions it a couple of times in the book, is that they're kind of, they're the 20th Legion, they're the newest, but they're shrouded in mystery, and the way they wage war is not necessarily the preferred method of other legions and other chapters, and sometimes they're called out for it. So that's kind of where we're up to. To talk too much more about the book, we'll run out of material with the stuff we're going to talk chapter by chapter. But it's certainly a change of pace. Unlike the change of pace we had with Descent of Angels was maybe a bit jarring. This is a change of pace in that it feels like an entirely different book. It takes place in the setting of the heresy and is heresy related, but could almost be a standalone.
Yeah, and this is setting up, because I think we start 2 years prior, don't we? And this is a big implications for what's to come later. So I think we should move into it and get the ball rolling. And before we do, I'll bring up the next slide just to help us out along the way. I'm going to have this up throughout so we can keep track of who is who in this twisting and turning book.
It is. And for those of you that have followed us up so far this way, obviously I'm lucky enough to cheat and listen to the audio books, so I've got a fairly good grasp of the pronunciations. Oh. There are some real names in here, so I'm looking forward to hearing how John tackles some of them.
I've actually, like, when I was reading it the second time, I was saying them out loud as I'm typing them. So we'll see. Mixed results, I think. What I might do is pause and point, get you to say the name, and then move on.
Yeah, fair enough.
We'll see. But I think I know Tom enjoys me butchering the names.
Indeed.
Right. So let's move on into part 1, Reptile Summer. Before we actually get into chapter 1, we have a bit of a prefix where we're introduced to who's going to become quite a key player. Hurtado Bronzy.
Hurtado Bronzy, yep, very good.
Well, hey, 1 for 1. So we get a bit of a monologue from him. And it's sort of him just telling us his background. He tells us that he's a hetman, which is a senior captain of the Geno 5-2 Chiliad of the Imperial Army, so just a regiment within the Imperial Army. He tells us that he serves the Emperor and his Lord Commander Namatjira. He tells us he knows the purpose of the Emperor and he knows how to use his carbine laser. He also says he knows much more, but knows when not to say these things because he has taught him how to be secretive and not to say his name. There's a very strange sort of introduction to the book, very strange manner of talking. And then he carries on saying that he tells us that his greatest gift was teaching secrecy. And he received this gift because he was there at the Shivering Hills and Monlo Harbour. Mm-hmm. I think by this point, it then becomes apparent that Bronzy is being tortured while he's telling us this tale. As the book goes on to sort of show us that he's being hurt, and he's telling that he's only going to tell him his name and he won't tell them his secrets, and they can torture him all he wants. And then it sort of cuts off there, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. And it's a bit of a precursor because it all kind of connects round in the end, and it makes sense once you get round to the end of the book, which is a lot like the book in itself, and the strands of the book as it weaves itself together.
Yeah.
And I think I know we'll come into it, but the Geno 5-2 Chiliad are like they're a very specific regiment within the Imperial Guard, or the Astra Militarum, in that they're kind of they're gene engineered, and they were from, their origins stretch back to the wars of unification on Terra, and whereas other regiments and battalions or whatever we're going to call them that took part in those wars were maybe disbanded and moved into other parts of the Astra Militarum and redeployed, the Chiliad itself was allowed to continue as it had done because of its kind of process and heritage of gene manipulation.
Yeah. Because the Emperor was like, he was keen to let them stay, but they all had to swear loyalty over to him.
Yeah.
And sort of leave the sort of, I think, their individual tribes or whatever they were doing pre-unification.
Yeah.
So that brings us, I suppose, like you was touched on just now, we're going to go through this book, and I think we're going to hit on things that are going to seem confusing, and it probably won't be in this part of the video, but maybe in a later video where threads are going to start coming together. So bear with us, because the book holds a lot of stuff out to the very end as well. So we'll unravel these mysteries as we go. And like I think we've mentioned before, every time we join a legion, they all work differently. And this army is probably our most extreme example of how different a regiment is,
Mm-hmm.
And this is from the human side. They're different to anything we've sort of dealt with. So we'll explain sort of ranks and things as we go, and try and make it make sense. Because the first time I read this book, I think I went cross-eyed, and the second time around it was a little bit easier. But yeah, it's trying to work it all out, but we'll get there. Cool. So kicking off, we are chapter 1, and we are at Tell-Tan on the planet Nurth, 2 years before the Horus Heresy, which I quite like. Every chapter sort of throughout this book tells you exactly. It keeps us in the time frame, so you're not going to get because the book's confusing enough, but here we get a nice time frame from start to finish. We know how long this takes. So we're on the planet Nurth, and we join another hetman called Pito Seneca.
Close.
Oh,
it was close. It's Peto, and it's
Sonica. Okay, so Sonic the Hedgehog, who
Indeed.
is out on patrol in a deserty area with his troop, and we join him, and they're standing over a dying Nurthine soldier, and they're trying to get details off of him about his troop's whereabouts, but they're having no luck. And as this guy's dying, he sort of tells Sonica that the Imperials are just proof of evil in the galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't really have any luck from him, and the guy bleeds out and dies. And in the distance, they can hear some las fire going on from behind the wadi they're in. So he decides to move on, get moving back to camp, and they march off.
And I suppose it's worth noting that the Nurthine are they're not Xeno, they're human. So they are humans, and they are. I think it tells you the categorization a bit later in the book, but they are like not as advanced as the Imperium. So they favor hand-to-hand combat, and they have a particular weapon which we'll come into in a bit. But they are the reason that their compliance is being a bit of a struggle. The reason why this campaign has kind of been delayed and is struggling on the planet Earth is because of what's referred to as air magic. Or one of the things that's referred to as air magic, but we'll come into that in a bit of time. But I think it's just important to note that this is not a Xenos race that are being wiped out. It is a compliance against the human world. Yeah,
and they're just another one. Like, they've been separate for so long. They're not keen at all. They're not interested. They've got their own. They're well embedded in their own ways, and the Imperium is not for them. So Sonica, he is 46 years old. He's been in the army for 23 years, and he's obviously very experienced. The troop that he leads is codenamed the Dancers, and their history goes back about 800 years. And as we touched on, all of his men have some sort of genetic altercation. They're bigger than the average human, and they're more muscly and more equipped for war. Not quite on the level of the Astartes, but more than you or I. And at this time, they're situated outside the city of Tell-Tan, and they've been trying to capture it for 8 months with no luck. And it's a bit of a dead heat, and they're heading back to a recently captured outpost called CR-23.
Mm-hmm.
And at CR-23, we rejoin Bronzy, who's with his troop, codenamed the Jokers. And as you can see on sort of the character list, and as we'll get through more of the book, all of the different units have their own code names, and they're all in a similar vein.
It's kind of like an old-fashioned, almost like circus entertainment. Like, that's like, because you've got like the Carnivales, so carnival. It's almost a bit like naming convention you'd get with the Harlequins from the older. And that sort of thing, because as I said, it's the clowns, it's the Jokers, it's the Carnivales. I can't remember what some of the others are, but they're all like, but they're all like entertainment-based code names for the Geno units.
I think they're all the same regiment, and they're all just split up into their units. So Bronzy's been at CR-23. They arrived about an hour ago. and all of his men are just having a rest. Here's a name for you, Shane. His Bashor. Is it just Tick? TCHE?
TCHE Bashor, because you got the Bashor bit right. That was nailed it.
Yeah, but I can't. There's no vowels.
But he's just called Bashor, isn't he? That's.
Well, if we have a look, I don't think he's actually even in the.
No, I was going to say I can't see his name in there, but yeah, Bashor is right. Yeah, so we bumped him to Bashor
because that's it. That's the rank, and that is like a rank of sergeant equivalent, I think. But I'm sure this guy is called Tick. It's TCHE. Someone out there will know. And basically, they're standing in their tent and they're looking out of the bunk, and their commander, Honan Mu. Yeah. She holds the rank of Uxor, or Uxor. Uxor, yeah. And she's essentially like the commander. I'd guess maybe a major or something.
It's a bit of a weird, like they're. Yeah. So the Uxors are all female.
Yeah.
And they are all low-level psychers. And it's explained as it goes on, but they do something in the battle called septing or sept.
Yeah.
And it's where they can settle the troops down, and it's where they use this low-level psychic ability to kind of guide and steer the units. Yeah. So they are commanders in a sense, but not by like barking out orders and being very authoritative. They do it with the mind, as it were. So they're almost like sat nav for the army, and it's like the way the Geno works is that they need the Uxors to direct, guide, and calm them during the battle. And the Uxors are like they're tied to their units via this sort of psychic link.
Yeah, it's strange because they still answer to the Uxors, but the Uxors aren't necessarily combat soldiers. So it's a weird one. They're more like back at HQ pushing the figures around on the warboard.
I think that's exactly it. It is exactly that. But where they're pushing the figures around, it's almost like because of their psychic powers, that's happening in, whereas, if you go back to, Blackadder and stuff like that, where Belchit was pushing around the armies and stuff like that. It's like that happens afterwards, whereas it's almost like real time with the Uxors. They think it and then it happens.
Yeah, I think just so it's not confusing, we're sort of explaining properly now. So, like you say, she's obviously it gets explained better. So the Uxors, they're all young. They get recruited at a young age, pre-teen. They get their ovaries removed, as they think that not being able to bear children increases the staying power of their mind.
Yeah.
And by the age of about 27, that's when they normally burn out and lose their psychic ability.
Yeah.
And they're always flanked with a number of younger Uxors in waiting who both learn from the senior, but they also provide a buff to the main Uxor. And keep them going that little bit longer. But yeah, so
apparently they put it about a bit as well.
Yeah, well, and that gets implied every time we sort of have a character talking to them. That's all they're thinking about in the back of their mind.
Yeah, quite funny.
Yeah. Bronzy and his Bashar are watching Honomu, and she is out talking to a man who's much taller and broader than the usual man, even more so than the Geno. Bronzy suspects he may be an Astartes, and all he knows from the rumor mill is that the commanders have brought a specialist in. This specialist is wearing some dusty grey armour in a body glove. His head and face are covered by a shawl, and he's got a big bolter slung over his back. Bronzy decides he's going to go and take a closer look, so he grabs his water bottle and pretends that he's going to go and refill it. But obviously, as soon as he leaves, Honomu notices him, and she just walks over, and he says he's going to fill up his water bottle, and she says, "No, you're here to be nosy," because she knows him very well. And she says, "Go and have a rest. You'll know what you need to know when you need to know it." which is this book all over. But he says to her, have the dancers made it in yet? And she says they're due in soon. And he asks if he can take out a small team to go and make sure they're okay and guide them in. But she says no, and explicitly tells him not to disobey. So he agrees with her, goes back to his tent, and then immediately tells his men to get ready because they're going to go out and find the dancers.
Going to go out for a ramble, I think.
We're going rambling.
I think he says.
Yeah. And he says, I'll be back in a minute. I'm just going to go for a wee. And as he's out at the urinal, he's doing his business. And then from behind, he hears the voice say, you'll stay put tonight. He doesn't look around and he just says, no, I'll do what I want. And the voice sort of repeats itself. So Bronzy turns to look at him, realizing how big this specialist is. And he says, are you threatening me? And the specialist says, do I really need to? Still probably with his buddy in his hand as well at this point. And I think Bronzy's actually one of the most well-written characters from the human perspective, because he's got a sense of humor all the way through. And he's well grounded, as in, and you'll see it a bit later on, like when it comes down to the battle, he knows what he's doing, but he's also, he knows that as well. So he just sort of doesn't really care about breaking the rules, and he's a bit of a lad.
Yeah.
So I think Dan Abnett had a bit of fun writing this guy.
I think generally speaking about it, it's like Dan Abnett's very good across all the books he does at writing the human perspective.
Yeah.
And as you said, I think he was able to have a bit of fun in this one, because there's a lot of non-modified humans. I say non-modified; they're all a bit modified to an extent, but less modified than Astarte type human characters for him to play with on both sides. So he can play with like a lot of humor. He can play, with the drama. He can play with like the tension between love interests and stuff like that. So as I said, it's a very human story, which is a change of pace for what we've seen so far in the Heresy.
Yeah. And just sort of sticking with Bronzy's sort of sense of humour, so he sort of turns around and offers to fight the specialists, and the specialist says, well, I admire your balls. And Bronzy says, they're only out because I'm taking a leak.
Yeah.
So they were definitely still in his hand. So the specialist sort of tells him he doesn't want him messing around and getting involved. Things are happening. He will understand later, but he needs to trust him and stay behind. And Bronzy says he'll trust him if he could see his face or just know his name. The specialist doesn't show him his face, but agrees to tell him his name and says the famous line of, my name is Alfarius. And no
wonder people get wound up with this legion.
Yeah. And Bronzy calls him a liar. And as he says that, they hear an explosion happen in the distance. And Bronzy immediately looks out and thinks of Petto. And when he turns back, the specialist is gone. And at that explosion, Petto, Sonica, and his men are under heavy fire. Bombs are raining down on them, bursting out into flames. Their tanks are being wiped out, just as easy as the men. And like you said, these bombs aren't normal. They're a bit more elemental and have been described as air magic, like you say. So this is why it's been so hard to actually conquer the Nurthine on foot. Sonica gets blown onto his face, and as he gets up, his basher called Lon runs over and grabs him, and gets his senses, slaps his senses back into him, and tells him they need to move on before the bombing starts again. But before they can actually make an escape, the Nurthine infantry attack them, and we get a really pretty decent battle scene here. First one. the Nurthine infantry, they carry these handheld weapons called a flax, which is like a long spear, which hand and a half grip, and the blade's like a really long curve.
Yeah.
And they can cut through almost anything, and they come in charging, and they literally start slicing the dancers into pieces, and that they really just run right through them. Eventually, Sonica, Lon, and a few of the others manage to form a firing line and start picking off some of the enemy while they're getting a call out for help. And then one of the men next to Sonica gets ripped clean in half.
Yep.
And as the guy swings for another attempt, Sonica tries to block with his bayonet, but this flax comes down, slicing through the top of his hand and ruining his sword grip.
It's I was going to say, I think it's a faux.
A faux. Oh, okay.
I think that's how they pronounced it in the audio.
No, it's probably right. I've probably written flax the whole way. We'll go with faux. That's fine. Yeah. And then the Nurthine infantry, they have a name as well, and I'm not going to try and butcher it. Do you know what it is, or do you need me to try and butcher it and then you can correct me?
Try and butcher it.
So it's the Nurth.
Oh no, that was good. That's it.
Hey, there we go.
That's it. You got it.
Yeah. So these infantry are called Nurth. So this guy goes. He's cut off the top of Sonica's hand, and he takes his second swing to finish him off. But another faux blocks the blow. And Sonica looks up and sees this huge brute of a man wielding it. And then another dozen Astartes come out of the shadows and basically save what's left of the dancers. Lon bandages Sonica's hand back up.
Yeah.
And they look into the distance and they see that Teru's hand is burning and it's in flames. Elsewhere, back at CR 23, Holland Moo is watching with the specialist from earlier, and he tells her to go and tell the Lord Commander that the mission was a success. Before he goes, he tells her firstly that the Emperor protects, and then that the Geno soldiers are a credit and perfectly built to the original designs.
Yep.
And they were an inspiration for the Emperor's creation of the Astartes. And as he turns to leave, she says, "Well, what's your name?" And he says, I am Alpha Legion. Use your sept and you will know." Again, no one likes to tell their names in the Alpha Legion. So he takes his leave of her and makes his way through the halls swiftly and silently. And suddenly Bronzy appears from the shadows and has his carbine pointed right at the specialist's chest.
Yeah.
And actually, the specialist is impressed with this genuine feat of stealth because I don't think he actually knew he was there.
No, he says to him, "Well done, Bronzy," or Hurtado, whatever he calls him. It's like that was genuinely stealthy, or however to put it.
And Bronzy's like, he's not happy. He sort of clicks onto what's happened. And he says, "Was the dancers being destroyed necessary for you guys to take Telutan?" And gets told that it was the best tactical way of getting the Nurthine by surprise and getting his men inside. He told his men to save as many of the dancers as possible, but they had to lure them out because Nurthine are protected by chaos. Bronze is obviously a bit devastated, but accepts the tactical logic behind it.
Yeah, he accepts the pragmatism, and I think that's what comes. As I said, it's throughout the book. It's played up the pragmatic kind of balanced way that the Alpha Legion approach war.
Yeah. Bronzy relaxes, lowers his weapon, and it gets ripped out of his hand quicker than he can realize, and then he gets slammed up against the wall. He says to the specialist, "Are you really Alpharius?" And the specialist takes off his shoulder and says, "Well, what do you think?" But we still don't get an answer.
We don't.
And then back out in the desert, Sonica wakes up after passing out from his wound. Lon tells him they lost a lot of men, and they're 3 of the specialists are stood nearby, and each sort of come over and speak in turn, and they say, too many were lost, but war requires sacrifice. We're sorry for your losses. And Sonica says, are you Astartes? And they say that they are. And he says, well, what are your names? And number one says, I am Alfarius. And Sonica and Lon take a knee and bow to him. And then the second one says, I am Alfarius. And then the third one says, we are Alpha Legion and we are one. And with that, they walk away. And that is the end of chapter 1.
Yeah.
So we obviously...
What do we know? Like we don't we know a bit about the Imperial Army. We know what they're doing. We know why they're struggling. Yeah. We know that Astartes are on the planet, but we don't really see many of them. And we don't really hear much about how they fight. Like if you think back to the other books, it's much more, the battles are described much more in depth. Whereas actually here, you hear like from Sonica's point of view, from Peto's point of view, and you see him getting a bit, as I said, he gets his hand cut into and gets maimed a little bit and stuff like that. But you don't really get into too much more detail about it, and it's more about like this kind of interplay between the Astartes and certain members of the regiment and the Uxor as well, in a way that is like, as I said, it's all kind of secrets and lies, as the title of the book indicates, and you just as I said, if you didn't know anything about the Alpha Legion before this, all you know is that they all keep saying they're Alfarius. If you do know anything about the Alpha Legion, then you kind of know why they're doing that. But you could see, as if you were just a member of the Imperial Guard, or even one of the leaders of the Imperial Guard, one of the commanders, you'd be so confused. Right?
Yeah.
And that's all we know. We know they're there, but we don't really know much more about them.
No. And even like just from this, like they obviously know who Astartes are, but for these guys, this is clearly the first time they're seeing them, because they have to ask, are you Astartes? So they don't know completely how they work. I suppose it's all fables coming to life in front of them. So they've got to...
Yeah. It's interesting because I think as we get introduced to, say, the Lord Commander of this theatre of war and stuff like that, he and we'll come into it when we get there, but it's worth noting now, he wishes it was any other legion than the Alpha Legion that was helping him out.
Yeah.
Because I think he uses a certain terminology about it, but they don't revel in the glory of war like the other chapters or the other legions. And it's already been shown a little bit here. They focus on the pragmatism of war, the decisions that are like, say it had been, the Space Wolves or Angron or someone like that, even the Blood Angels that were doing it. It would have been like a glorious, heroic charge into the Nurthine, face to face, toe to toe, with the remembrances, drawing pictures and writing poems about how wonderful the charge was. Whereas here they're like, right, no, what we're going to do is we're going to use this little troop of humans. We're going to send them out there. We're going to wait until they get attacked. And then because they get attacked, we're going to be able to just completely overrun and destroy the Nurthine. And actually, we won't lose any Astartes, and we might lose 50% of this unit called the Dancers. And it's like, that's fine. That's acceptable losses.
That's worth it.
Yeah.
That's worth it. Yeah. Yeah. Quite cold, but very well thought out. And we've obviously just had our first mention of chaos as well. So the Nurthine, it's not necessarily air magic. The Astartes know there's some chaos on the planet somewhere. So that's the other battle. And I guess that's going to be news to the humans.
What's interesting is because this is 2 years pre-heresy, the fact that the Alpha Legion are talking as they are about chaos also puts them ahead of other legions, their brother legions, because you fast forward to the start of the heresy, to the trilogy, where you've got Horus and stuff like that, and his first understanding of chaos and what lies behind the warp and stuff like that, he doesn't really get introduced to it until he's going to turn, right? It all happens really quickly. So that's 2 years in the future from the point we're at now. So it shows how sort of maybe more developed or aware the Alpha Legion are of the goings on and the wider galactic space. And I think it does come up with the Cabal. One of them says, like, we had to pick you because you see the long picture.
Yeah.
But we'll come into that when we get there.
Well, that's it, isn't it? Like you say, Horus, he is like powering through the Great Crusade, fighting alongside the Emperor here and there, and he's just full go all the time. These guys clearly, like, they do it slow. They think they're probably coming across more. They're different part of the galaxy, so they've obviously, it's different experiences, isn't it? And I suppose, like you say, that's why they're chosen. So anyway, that brings us on to chapter 2, and that will take us 5 weeks later to Visages.
Visages, yeah.
I think I've spelled that wrong there, so ignore that.
All right. If people be listening along, John's done a typo.
Do you know what? That's really annoying because I went back and checked, but I didn't go back far enough. Anyway, there we go. So following that attack, Sonica, he has been sent to Visages for some R&R with the other survivors and other injured soldiers.
Yeah.
It's another captured cluster of dwellings, and they've renamed it Visages. It was called Telcat before. He's been here recovering, waiting for surgery, and has been given a new mechanical hand. So those paying attention in Descent of Angels, the apothecaries were able to regrow somebody's hand in that one. But here, there's no regrowth. It's very Star Wars and robot hands.
Yes. Well, as we know from the modern day Imperium, you can get all sorts of augmented arms and legs and whatever else, but you can't regrow it. So, as I said, I don't know at what point they lost that ability, but it's lost somewhere.
So these guys, although they've had a horrendous time here, they've actually been quite lucky now. So they've been sunbathing, swimming in the pools of water around the cliffs, and they've been given a healthy supply of wine and peck.
They've been having a great time. I remember describing, they're sitting there playing these games. Other guys are running around breaking in livestock. Just let's do some whatever alien horses are on this planet. Let's run it, ride around on them. It is proper R&R recovery. It sounds, very idyllic compared to the front lines. Yeah.
It actually, they make it sound quite nice. It's just a bit of a holiday camp. And they've got all the wine and peck, which the way that they describe it, taking a pinch of peck, because they have these little golden boxes around their neck on a little chain, don't they? So I think they get a bit of some sort of narcotic to
it could
pick
be,
them up.
It could be as as innocent as what was that tobacco that you used to get the people back in Victorian times just used to put under their nose? I can't remember what it's called. It's like snout, something like that. But it could just be as simple as some sort of tobacco, or on the other side, it could be the military equivalent of Bolivian marching powder that they've said, yeah, okay, well, this is what we do in the future.
Yeah, if it's going to make you fight, get your senses on board. And get you fighting, and especially if you get your hand chopped off, it's going to help, isn't it?
Well, you're not going to be as worried about it. We've all seen Scarface.
Yeah. So he has Sonica has been spending time with another hetman called Shiban, company codename Clowns, and he got injured and sent here after he caught some shrapnel in his neck. He has left his company in the command of a Bashur named Strabo, or as we will come to know him, Fugging Strabo.
Fugging Strabo.
Strabo.
Strabo. It's interesting that they. This is just because I was thinking about this the other day. All the other swear words in this particular book, like are all as you'd expect, right? Apart from the F word where they use fugging.
Yeah, maybe when he was writing it, they said you can have a couple of swears, but not too many.
Yeah,
he wanted to get it in.
Because I'm reading it's a side note. I'm reading another 40k book at the moment. It's not part of the Heresy. It's just one of the 40k crime novels.
Okay.
And there's no fugging in that. It's all effing. Like it's the same, And it's interesting, like how whatever reason they went, we're going to go with fugging for this. It's fine. Like you know what they're talking about. It's just one of those weird little bits that pops up. But yeah, fugging Strabo.
Yeah, I don't think we've had a lot of swear words. I mean, we've got a lot of pissing and stuff like that. But we don't get a lot of swearing.
You get a lot, but you get. I think the Astartes. That's the thing. They don't really. The Astartes don't really swear, and most of it has been Astartes based at the moment. You get things like thrown and stuff like that, and that's thrown. Like that's like their equivalent. But this is the first one where you've got, a proper genuine, coarse language. Maybe it's because we're just with the more standard soldiery as opposed to the elite in the Astartes.
I suppose when you've got a bolter that big, you don't really need to swear, do you? It says enough for you.
Yeah, indeed.
So these guys, they've been chilling out and they've had a bit of a game going on. Basically, they're gambling on sending their people out from their teams to collect certain size rocks, and they're gambling over who can bring back sort of the biggest one, or the second biggest one wins.
It's carved heads, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's why it's called visages. So that's why they named it, because like in this, there's loads of these carved heads from like stone, all different sizes, all different shapes, right up to like huge boulder-sized ones, right down to tiny ones. And as I said, the game's quite interesting because it's not bringing back the biggest one. It's got to be, as you said, it's the second biggest one.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you just have to throw it back again.
Yeah, and the only reason the men sort of, obviously they're playing, but they get a nice chug of wine if they bring back the right size rock. And the two hets are gambling over which of their teams are going to win. And Bronzy arrives and greets his two friends, and he immediately sits down and puts a bet against Sonica to lose, because. Well, as we'll learn, these two go way back, and they're probably as good as best friends as you're going to get. Definitely brothers in arms. And later that evening, after the game, Sonica's team won, and he says to Bronzy, "Why are you here?" And Bronzy says, "Well, I got a 5-day furlough to come and visit him." But Sonica doesn't quite believe him. And while they're sitting there, a medic comes over and interrupts and say that the chief medicae has a dead dancer that she needs Sonica to come and identify. So they go into the room that's now being used as a morgue, and they look at a body which was recovered from the desert. It had been there for a few weeks, and it is rotting and bloated. And being high-level commanders, Sonica knows his men thoroughly and says that is not one of his men. And this medicae named Ida argues and says, well, he's wearing dancer uniform. He was found in the same wadi where you were attacked.
Yeah.
And Sonica is adamant, no, he's not one of mine. All of mine, dead or alive, have been accounted for. And then Ida sort of backs down and agrees and says she just needed to check that. She was fairly certain as well. And she wanted to make sure before she alerts the Chiliad Uxors. Looking at the body, it has some serious genetic alterations, and they noticed a small tattoo that appears to be a reptile, which is a repeating symbol throughout Nurth and the Nurthing. They sort of, I don't know if we get that far, but everything's very reptilian in symbols on this planet.
Hence the part 1 reptile summer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So right now they would assume, if you saw someone with a mark or a tattoo that was a bit like reptilian in appearance, obviously this plays out as the book goes on. But they automatically assume, okay, that's some sort of Nurthine mark or affiliation.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to go into it, but obviously the alterations are quite severe.
Yeah. So as a result, Sonica places a guard on that room, no one in or out. And Bronzy says, look, the reason I'm really here is I feel bad. I wanted to apologize. I didn't want to leave the dancers to get destroyed, but I was warned off. And Sonica says, look, I know I was used as bait to lure out the Nurthine because I was told to my face after it happened. And Bronzy tells him, well, yeah, I was told by Alfarius myself. And Sonica breaks the news to him and says, they're all called Alfarius. And after all these years of rumor and secrets, they've had the luck to come across the most secretive legion of the Astartes, and they sort of wonder, what war are we really fighting here?
Yeah.
They then go to the post commander and ask to use his encrypted Vox to get a message back to Hononmu. And when they're finally able to connect and get through the right channels, they transmit straight to her, get through to her, and they tell her, we've got a serious security breach. We need an air extract, and tell her sort of what's going on. And she tells them, I can't send one. It's too risky, but the body should be transported via land, and we'll get the cavalry to meet you at a RV point, and we'll get the body back.
They make quite a big, or Dan Abnett makes quite a big point of writing about the line being secure, and like as when they have these compacts, like I think it's 3 lights that go on to show that the line is secure and connected. And it's quite telling that that's described and detailed. So it's an important thing to keep in mind as the book develops.
Yeah. Hononmu asks who else knows, and Bronzy says just me and the post commander. The Medicae knows and some staffers, and that's it. And then they end the call. Sonica says, why didn't you tell her that I know? And he says, because you're going to stay behind. You're not coming with me. Sonica argues with him, but Bronzy says that Hononmu sounded off to him, and he feels like something's off. And if something goes wrong, at least there's someone else who knows what's going on, who's not known to command. And he arranges a transport for the body, and he says, I'll take Shaban with me, and because he can handle himself, and you're going to stay here. You're my ace in the hole. At night, Bronzy and Shaban set off in the transport with the body, and Shaban says, are you going to tell me what's going on? And Bronzy just says no. And they drive on through the night into the dawn. So later on, Sonica wakes up. He's back in his bunk, wakes up early, and goes outside, and immediately can tell something's off because the guards aren't in their usual place. And he just sees some shadowy figures moving through the camp. And he thinks, oh, here we go, and runs to the camp commander to raise the alarm, runs into the office to tell him what happened, and the commander doesn't react. And as he's trying to figure out what's going on, Fawkes swings out of nowhere, and luckily Sonica is able to avoid it. And then he dives over the table, smashing into the commander, who's actually already dead, and manages to avoid a blow that cuts off the dead commander's arm. Pure luck here. The only thing he can do, he picks up a writing quill and throws it like a dart, getting this Nurthine warrior in the cheek, dives on him, and he's able to wrestle the Fawkes off of him and chop his head off. And then he pulls his gun out and shoots the next 2 that run into the door. He gets the next one right in the face, and hits the alarm, and then all hell breaks loose throughout the camp. He runs out. There's fighting everywhere. Lots of the Imperials are being cut down. He runs to the cold store where the morgue is, and he runs in and manages to kill 2 Nurthine warriors. Ida tells him to run, and as he turns around, he sees that she's already been impaled through the chest and she's nailed up against the wall.
Yeah.
He calls out for a medic, but she just dies. And as he inspects one of the Nurthine, he notices a tattoo of a crocodile on one of them. But before he can really have a look, more pour in, and he starts picking them off and fighting for his life. Bronzy and Shaban, they arrive at the RV point and come to a stop, but nobody's there. So Bronzy gets out of the crawler and he can see this figure walking in the distance towards him. And he sees it for the first time, a space marine in full battle plate. It's purple, trimmed in silver and green markings.
Yeah.
And this Astartes greets Bronzy by name and says, "I thought I told you not to get involved." Bronzy asks him what's going on, and the marine tells him it's none of your business. It's a shame that you got involved because now there's only one option. At this point, Shaban shouts out for the marine to leave him alone and runs round to the side, pointing his blaster at this Astartes. But quick as a flash, the Astartes shoots Shaban, blows him to pieces with his bolter. The Astartes then towers over Bronzy, who says, "Why are you doing this?" To which the Astartes says, "For the Emperor."
Indeed.
And that is the end of chapter 2. So another eventful chapter.
Yeah. Again, what we more questions than answers. Like we do get a bit of an answer as to what happened with Peto Sonika's troop and kind of like the pragmatism of war and why they're there. And actually, as I said to begin with, it seems quite chilled out and idyllic, and everything's going all right in Visages. And then Bronzy shows up. Then you get the intrigue of this surgically altered cadaver or corpse that has a reptilian tattoo, and then it's all a bit shady. Bronzy leaves. Suddenly, Sonika's woken up in the middle. The camp's been attacked by what we assume is Nurthine troops. We don't know. They're dressed as Nurthine. They're carrying Nurthine weapons. Again, another one has a mark, a reptilian tattoo. It's described as a crocodile. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a crocodile. And it's as I said, it doesn't even mean that they're actually Nurthine. It could be anyone.
Could be.
And then obviously that's tied together at the end, where you've then got Bronzy bumping into an Astartes who is speaking to him in a way that would appear that they've met before or are familiar with each other, but also may not be. As I said, as far as Bronzy's concerned, it could be the same Astartes, but it is it? We don't know.
It's a lot of threads to pull, isn't it?
Yeah. And all we know is that right now, as I said, it's doing a very good job of, or Dan Abnett's doing a very good job of raising lots of questions.
Yeah.
And that is a theme that continues for at least the first quarter of the book. Yeah,
and I think going into the next chapter, we're just going to have some more questions by the end of this one. So we are now at Monlo Harbour, still on Nurth, and this is 2 days later.
I do quite like the way they do. As I said, Dan does signpost exactly where you are in the story. I think it adds to it.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think with a lot of especially like Descent of Angels, the timeline isn't strictly clear.
No.
I mean, for the sake of for like the main character, we know how old he was when we met him and how old he was when he became an Astartes, but it seems quite fluctuating. Where here I can't remember off the top of my head, but when we look at it, this is one event over a very short period of time. This book.
Yeah, I do like how, as I said, I think it's for the style of the book as why they've called out the timelines in this way, because I think it adds to that kind of spy thriller type of approach, which is quite nice.
So although John Grammaticus was over 1,000 years old, he had only been Konig Henniger for 8 months. And he was still getting used to the idea. So that's an introduction to another main character. And we'll go into a bit of detail on him. So we'll learn pretty quickly that Grammaticus is a spy, but on a super advanced level. And he's currently posted with the Geno 5-2 under the guise of Konig Henniger. So we found out that John is 1,000 years old, but Konig is 56 years old. And he serves in the Intel unit for the Geno 5-2. John was born a human. And he still thinks of himself as human, but has become less dedicated to humanity after the first time he died. He's still fond of humans, but he's been with the Cabal for a very long time now. Do you want to go into what the Cabal is?
Well, yeah, there's a whole load. So, as I said, lore heads will know, or will have, as soon as you hear the name John Grammaticus. A lot of lore heads will raise their eyebrows and know exactly, where we're going and what's going on here. He's an interesting character in 40k lore, so it's one well worth having a quick Google on to read into him a bit more. Without being too spoilery for you and the rest of the heresy, John, he's what's known as a perpetual, which is. So there are a number of different perpetuals that exist in the 40k universe. The Emperor is one. I can't remember the name of the woman that was involved in the creation of the Primarchs, but she was another one. John Grammaticus is a perpetual now, so he was born a human but became a perpetual because of the intervention of the Cabal. And then another well-known or famous perpetual in 40k lore is also Vulcan, Primarch of the Salamanders. So they exist. They're in there, and perpetuals are effectively, to a degree, they're immortal. So if they die, they effectively rise again. They're regenerated, as it were. Now the Cabal have been knocking around for a long time. We find out more of them as the book goes on. You find out how long they've been at play and what they're doing, and they're effectively a United Nations of Xenos races, as it were. They're like effectively a group of Xenos races that, for whatever reason, have put aside their differences and come together to pool their knowledge and resources to ultimately fight the great, is it the Great Annihilator they call it?
That's the one, yeah.
Yeah, the Great Annihilator, which is chaos. That's just their term for it. And again, we learn more about it as we go on. But they have far seen, because obviously they have Eldar as part of this Cabal. They have all sorts of different Xenos. They have foreseen that humanity is the key to defeating the Great Annihilator, and they've foreseen far seen the heresy and what it's going to do. They know, so they can't stop it. That's what they said. There's no stopping the heresy, but the outcome will dictate what happens with the Great Annihilator and how it can be combated. And so they have many different agents working for them. John Grammaticus is one of those agents, and he's tasked with a mission to infiltrate the Chiliad on Nurth, because they also know that the Alpha Legion are operating on Nurth, with the idea of making contact and then facilitating a meeting between Alfarius, at least the real Alfarius, or the Primarch of the Alpha Legion, let's say, and the Cabal, so that they can show them, they can talk to Alfarius or the Primarch about what is happening and what is going to happen, and they can also show them something, and again we'll come into it, but they can also show them something called the acuity, which is...
I'm so glad you said that then. I've been pondering that one, dreading getting to that.
There we go. It's the acuity. So they can show them the acuity, which is like a kind of like a chamber that effectively allows the Cabal to see. I say see the future, but as I said, it's more like the Elder, or the Eldari far-seeing. So which is a version of looking into the future, but it's
like
it's a
prophecy,
bit more,
isn't it?
yeah, it's a bit more like that rather than the future that will be, as it were.
Yeah.
But that's the Cabal on a very short note.
Yeah. So they sort of say from here, they've been obviously, like you said, interested in humans for a very long time. They came to us, I think, when we were still cavemen, so well before 40k, all this sort of stuff. And they've sort of always just sort of kept an eye on it. But the more inner circle species are less fond, and they sort of think we're too feral, too disobedient, and they actually start thinking maybe we should have destroyed them when we first discovered them.
Yeah.
They have had human agents before, to varying degrees of success. Grammaticus has only succeeded this far because he is a high-functioning psyker.
He is.
And he has even met the Emperor on one occasion, a very long time ago, when the Emperor was just another warlord on Terra with his thunder armored warriors. John had been a line officer in one of the forces loyal to the Emperor. And after a particularly large victory, he was one of many invited to a feast where the Emperor came and did a bit of a meet and greet and thanked his allies for helping. And they had a one-on-one meeting where he shook hands with the Emperor. And in that moment, he felt the power that the Emperor had within him. And the Emperor obviously felt his power too, and sort of said, well, when we get time, we need to talk about options being open to beings such as themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But before they could meet again, John died for the first time. So John, he's not a fan of the Great Crusade. He agreed with sort of the initial conception to go out and find all those lost to humanity and reunite them. But the Emperor's vision is that everyone sings off the same song sheet. We don't have our own opinions. We all go to one opinion, the imperial truth. But obviously, John's a bit more wise and realizes that after thousands of years of separation and not being connected to Terra, people have moved on and might not necessarily either want to serve under him or even have anything to do with him and just be left alone, and necessarily change their way of life just because someone from Terra is telling them they have to. And he really doesn't like the fact that the Emperor, his go-to is, if they say no, immediately turns to force. And he doesn't like that the Emperor released the Astartes into the universe because it's just now killing all round, and he finds it really ironic that he's here to make contact with one of these legions that he'd rather avoid. So one of the Cabal's inner circle, named Gehet, once said to John that the Emperor was only a human, and they would even consider at the time letting him be the only human they would let join the inner circle. But John told them that they wouldn't like him because he's a bloodthirsty bastard. Heresy. And Gehet told him that would be a great ally against the Great Annihilator. So there's obviously been a bit of decision over maybe have the Cabal actually ever had contact with the Emperor.
They may well have done. Maybe so.
But more currently, John Grammaticus, or Konig, as we know him at the minute. He's currently based at the Terracotta Palace, about 15 kilometres from Monlo Harbour, which is being used as a control station where all the commanders are. He's there for a meeting with Uxor Ruxana.
Yeah, Ruxana's that. That's it. Yeah.
Cool. So he's there to see her, and obviously she's surrounded by her 4 aides. So she is 28 years old and at the very end of her powers.
Yeah.
And Konig has just returned from an intel mission from Monlo Harbour, which is controlled by the Nurthine, and he's giving his findings back to them and being debriefed. But he's only telling them what he wants them to know.
Yeah, and like he can. This is where we also get the more insight into the aides around the sept and around the Uxor, because they're all thinking their delirious little thoughts about him as well as the general soldiery.
Yeah.
That is elsewhere. So you get that little insight into it. And I can't remember where they talk about, but it's revealed obviously that Grammaticus is like, although he's a psyker, the one like his particular niche is like languages.
Yeah.
And kind of suggestion. So he can speak in a way that's like coupled with his psychic ability, that it kind of incepts into people's heads what they want to see.
Yeah.
So it's very these are not the droids you're looking for type of activity. And he does say there is a name for it. This particular psychic ability.
There is, and I know I've written it down. But so when it comes,
it comes when you meet the other psyker.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, because they sort of say, "Oh, you can do this and you can do that." But yeah, we'll find out exactly what it was. And yeah, because he can sort of just say to you, "This is who I am," and then it wears off when you walk away.
Yeah.
To varying degrees. So what he's saying is there's a port in the harbour that he discovered. 1,200 years ago, it was used for spaceships, but over time and due to natural causes, it's now filled with water. The Nurthine don't have any space travel, and they've just been using it as a normal port for boats.
Yeah.
And he tells the Uxor the reason the Nurthine are against being made compliant is that they fear strangers from space and fear that they're evil, and they don't actually recognize humans as their own kin anymore. But what he doesn't tell them is they're actually corrupted by what he calls the primordial annihilator.
That's it.
He doesn't tell them because he doesn't think they'll understand the concept of chaos, and he wonders why the Emperor hasn't made this common knowledge to all of his people, and why chaos is such a secret. They then go into conversation about the best way to attack Monlo Harbour. And the other thing that we find out now that John actually has the ability to put himself into the minds of other people and look out through their bodies, and jumps into the Uxor's eyes and looks at himself. And he's thinking actually he's quite attracted to this Uxor, and might even actually be in love with her. But then while he's in her mind, he can tell that she's actually attracted to him as well. So he jumps back into his own mind after that, and he says, I'm going to go back to the harbour to collect more data, which will help any attack, and I'll be back hopefully within 3 days. And with that, the aides are kicked out, and after a little bit of flirting between John and Roxana, the rest of their meetings left to our imagination. And we flash forward to the late afternoon where our imagination is confirmed, and they're laying in bed together, and John's regretting letting himself get this close to another human. And he really hates that she doesn't actually know who he is. He wants to tell her, and he's conflicted, but he's obviously not going to tell her yet. So she says to him, do you really have to go back to the harbour? And he says, Yes, I do. And as he's getting ready, he starts hearing his name being said in his head. And he sort of dives out of bed and rushes off to the toilet. And he looks into a mirror, and Gehet is looking back at him through the mirror.
Yep.
And Gehet says to him, "Why are you risking everything? The galaxy must live. Stop messing around." And John says, "Well, I still want to be. I still want to live. If we're going to be alive, I still want to have a life." And Gehet says that they have eliminated agents for less. And John says, "Well, don't threaten me." But with that, Gehet fades away. So that's how they sort of communicate with him. It's through reflection.
Yeah.
Like through mirrors and pools of water and bits like that. They can sort of communicate from wherever they are in the galaxy. And that's how they sort of get their messages to each other.
There is a specific name for it, but I can't remember what it's called. Like there is a term. It comes up later in the book as a term for that type of communication, because John has to do it himself.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember. I'm sure it's written down. Eventually we'll get to it. So the next morning, he says goodbye to the Axor, and he gets picked up by an escort and taken to the insertion point. As he goes out, he's greeted by a Bashor and 3 troopers who are going to escort him. And like you mentioned, he can speak any language and tell where they're from just by looking and speaking to them.
Mm-hmm.
And he greets the Bashor in his native tongue. And then while he's on the journey, he regrets doing it, because the entire time this guy just asks him if he's visited his home planet.
Yeah.
And John has actually been to this guy's planet once 500 years ago, and he was part of the army that burned the place to the ground. So, yeah, he obviously has to bite his tongue a little bit there.
Yeah.
He gets left at the RV point at the end of a large Imperial encampment, and he slides into the darkness of no man's land, travels for 10 kilometers, and as he's en route, he transforms himself from Konig Hinneka into Dasal Hultar.
Mm-hmm.
Really just changes his clothes, and the rest of his disguise is done through his mind. The only weapon he has on him is a traditional Nurthing knife and a ring on his finger. And as he gets to the entrance of the city, he's stopped by some guards and asked to show his hands, his face, and his braids. And as he starts to do this, he uses his mind on the guard and tells them, "You've seen all you need to, now let him in." And with that, the guard lets him in. But really, John hasn't shown him anything. And now he's in the city, wandering through, and he's aiming to get to the northern area called Canal.
Mm-hmm.
And he's retracing his steps from his last visit. There are no street signs. All the routes are marked by pictures of various lizards and symbols. So he notices one symbol and thinks, "Oh, I haven't seen that one before. I must have taken a wrong turn." And this city is so complex, and he's actually having a hard time remembering the details. So he stops to compose himself, to try and get his bearings, sorts himself out, heads in the right direction until he realizes, actually, I'm going the wrong way.
Yeah.
So again, he stops, and he has a water carrier come over to him and offer him a drink of water, and he just says, "No, thank you." And this water carrier walks away saying, "God love you anyway."
Mm-hmm.
But as he walks away, John gets quite a chill and realizes actually what the guy said was, "The primordial annihilator immolate your living soul."
One or the other.
Yeah. He'll love your soul one way. Yeah. So although I had to look up what immolate means, because
like burn
by sacrifice by burning. Yeah. So pleasant.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Definitely. Bang on with the primordial annihilator. Very much their scene.
Yeah. So with that lovely bit of news, he starts to panic, and he's trying to find the right path. And he reaches into one of his pouches, and he's got like a Xenos seed, and he's holding it, and this seed actually warms up if it detects any psychic energy nearby.
That's it. Yeah.
And it's always normally warm because it's with him and it detects him. But as he grabs hold of it this time, it's actually red hot, and he realizes that he's in trouble. And this seed sort of gives him a heads up because now he knows that something's actively hunting him. And as he feels that, he hears his name again mentioned, but his Nurthine name this time is getting called out by a trader who's walking towards him, and he's looking at him trying to remember this guy's name. And then the guy asks him about this particular deal they've been working on to do with some bricks. And he's able to make some excuses and say that his supplier has let him down because of the war. And he gets away from this guy pretty sharpish, moves out into this open space and ends up by a foot of a temple, and realizes this temple is for the primordial annihilator. And he looks up and sees on top of this temple a symbol that shows the 4 properties of their particular god, which are death, ecstasy, mortality, and mutability. So it sounds quite familiar.
You know, four areas, you know, maybe close to, you know, 4 deities that are close to all of our hearts in the modern Imperium. Not quite calling them out as to what they are, but very close to.
Yeah. And he thinks, I really didn't want to end up in this place.
No.
And this symbol starts to pulse in his mind, making him feel sick. And he starts to realize that something has tricked him and led him into a trap. And he just runs down into an alleyway and throws up, and notices that the 2 men are walking towards him. So he gets up and makes off from them, but coming from the other direction are 3 more men.
Yeah.
So he takes a desperate turn into a dead end, and all the doors down this alleyway are locked, except a wooden gate that has green markings of 3 intercoiled reptiles. So he goes in, bolts the door behind him, and is relieved that it's nice and cool and dark in there. And suddenly a large armored hand grabs him by the neck and slams him up against a wall. And a voice says, I have a deep suspicion that you have been looking for me, John Grammaticus. And John says, well, that's possible, but it depends on who you are. And the voice responds, my name, you know my name, you treacherous bastard. I am Alfarius.
Is he? Is he?
They're all Alfarius. I think I'm Alfarius at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, John's gone from being super spy to actually in a bit of a bad situation quite quickly there.
Yeah. He's been gamed a little bit.
Yeah.
Don't know by who, don't know why, don't know how. All we know is, as I said, he's trapped a little bit, and he's been pushed into this area that, you know, he wasn't expecting to be at. And again, this comes down to another trait that we'll see from the Alpha Legion, in that they are arch manipulators in how they go about, you know, prosecuting their not only their martial wars, but also just generally everything from, you know, information gathering to how they use agents and the rest of humanity.
Mm.
Is it Alfarius?
Well,
who knows?
He says he is.
Yeah.
We'll take his word for it.
A lot of them say they are.
Right. Okay, so we're on chapter 4. We are in the House of the Hydra, still on Monlow Harbour. And the fist around John's throat was choking him so bad that he could barely use his mind, but he's able to say, let me go. And suddenly the hand releases from around his neck and he's dropped to the floor. John looks around the dark room, but he can't see anything other than a giant shadow and the red glow of the eyes of the visor. He uses his mind again to say, step back and keep your hands away from your weapons. And the giant shadow takes a step back. And then another voice shouts out and stops him from doing that. Grammaticus tries to get up, and as he does, a horrible squeal stabs into his mind, causing him extreme pain all the way through his body, and he falls down again. He tries to resist, but the giant shadow grabs him and says, I want some truth from you, John. And if I detect lies, I'll kill you. And the shadow tells him that Sheer is going to release him. And when he's released, he's not to make any mind tricks. Otherwise, they will kill him. So John agrees. And with that, they turn the lights on. And he's able to look around and realize that he's in the home of some sort of interesting looking room. And he gets a good look at this person called Sheer, who has like a hooded figure in the corner, and they're not wearing a mask, and he's looking straight at him, but there's some sort of psychic protection in place, blocking him from actually seeing this person's face. So another psyker just as powerful as John here, because he can't actually contend, or probably more powerful because he can't contend with him.
I think it comes into it when they talk about it in a bit more detail. But as I said, it's a very talented, powerful psyker that's maybe a different type of psyker.
So John has a look around again, and he sees this Astartes is in purple armor with silver edging and green markings. And this Astartes says, you've been looking for me. That's why you keep coming to this city, because you knew I'd be here. And I want to know how you knew. Grammaticus tells him it's because the Cabal he works for invited the Astartes, and this psyker starts putting more pain on to Grammaticus, because obviously he's not telling them directly what they want to hear. Although these guys play mind games, they don't like riddles from other people.
They don't like being or feeling like they're being manipulated. So
No.
It's like, it's a hallmark of the Alpha Legion is they want to control. I said it in the last chapter. It's arch manipulators, right? They want to be the strings pulling on they want to be the puppeteer pulling on the strings, as opposed to being manipulated themselves.
Yeah, he gets the psyker to release him, and he said, I'll tell you more. And he says that the Cabal has sent me. I need to talk to you. You are the only hope for the galaxy.
Yeah.
And the Astartes says you're talking about the Imperium, and Grammaticus says no, broader than that. Broader than the species. I'm talking about everything, every living being in the galaxy, more important than just the human race.
Yeah.
You're being too tribal and too inward thinking. And with this, the Astartes points his gun straight into John's face and says, "Are you insane? Look at me. I'm an Astartes warrior, oath to this moment. Why would you say something so close to treason?" And he apologizes and says, look, give me a chance to explain. You were invited here by the Cabal for me to meet you, because the Cabal believe that the Alpha Legion are going to be the most receptive to its message.
Yeah.
I don't know any details. I'm just here to broker a meeting. The Cabal has obviously had some sort of influence in getting the Alpha Legion involved in this Nurthian war. But he doesn't tell them that. He wants them to be exposed to the primordial annihilator, so they'll be more receptive when they actually do meet the Cabal, and they'll have some understanding in the greater good.
Yeah.
But so the Astartes says, "Are you talking about warp magic?" And he says, "It's not magic. It's a deep power from within the universe, and it's called chaos." And the Astartes says, "We already know what chaos is." And he says, "No, you think you know, but you don't. We've already encountered many Xenos hazards." And he says, "Look, that's not what it is. You know chaos. Is it as if you're a child? It's much more complex than that. And if you come and see the Cabal, you'll get to understand it with your own eyes and know exactly what sort of danger and what sort of war we're in. And chaos is poisoning the universe, and you guys are going to be the cure. I'm only here to organize a meeting and nothing else." And as he's sort of winning them over, the Astartes gets a message in his helmet and turns to leave, and he tells the psyker, "You stay here and keep an eye on John. Don't let him leave." And as the Astartes goes out the door, John notices a green hydra painted on the back of the door. So the psyker, Shear, takes John through the safe house to another room. And they said, why did you have to baffle me to get me lost?
Yeah.
And they said, we did it because we know you've been following us, and we wanted to get you here to ask you what's going on. So they have a bit of a conversation about each other's psychic skills, and they get a sense of what the other can do. Sort of friendly, but they're also sort of feeling each other out. And like Grammaticus obviously says that he can speak to any sort of being, whether it's human or Xenos.
Yeah.
He's never come across anyone that he couldn't speak to. And the psycho sort of says, well, how did you manage to get us here? And he says, it's taken 10 years, and there's been a number of agents planting seeds and suggestions for a while. We've infiltrated Imperial codes to orchestrate the Alpha Legion. And basically, we've made the Alpha Legion think they wanted to come here.
Yeah. Very smart.
Yeah. And the psycho's like, well, very impressive, but really be careful how you explain this to the Astartes, because they're not going to like that. Not one bit. And Grammaticus says, well, I'm actually impressed with yourselves as well. You've been able to manipulate me. The second I walked through the city, you've been on me. And they said, no, we've only been aware of you since you got to the temple. And he said, no, I've been influenced since I walked into this city. And with that, the other psycho sort of has a bit of a panic attack, and says they've been compromised. And with that sort of horror, Grammaticus realizes that the Alpha Legion and the Cabal are not the only forces that have been playing games today.
No, someone else has been using them to track down the Alpha Legion. Again, spies within spies.
Yeah, and with that, like Shear jumps on her Vox and tells them that something's going on, and grabs John and says they're going to move. And as they go, they look out the window, they realise the city's unusually quiet, which obviously starts raising alarm bells. And with that, 3 men then enter the room, 2 sort of normal sized men and 1 larger man. And the larger man, called Herzog, starts towards Grammaticus as if he's going to knock him out. And Cher says, no, he's valuable. Peck told me to watch him and keep him safe. So they then all leave the room together and make their way out of the house. And John does a bit of probing, trying to work out who these people are. And he's thinking, like, who's Peck, and when did he tell her to keep me safe? And he obviously realizes, like, this guy introduced himself as Librarius, and he's trying to work out how these names all connect, and who these people are. But he gets distracted, because as they run out of this door, there's like a flood of lizards running around the building, pouring in like crazy. And they go, oh, we're not going out this way. And they run back up the stairs. And as they're running, John starts to feel this presence of a really angry psyker. And they get to the top floor, and there's like a bridge leading out of their building off across to another building. And these lizards are piling up literally like a flood behind them in a wave. And Herzog shouts out for one of his men to stop and delay, and give him time to get away. So this guy reluctantly stops and turns and starts shooting into this crowd of lizards, but they're on him, and they literally like pull him down and eat him where he stands, and this guy gets buried. The survivors get to a door, and as Herzog's about to kick it open, the door splinters inwards, sending him flying, and this 2-meter long snout shoves its way through. It's like a huge crocodilian-like beast. And everyone starts shooting at this crocodile, and this one other soldier in particular, he gets the crocodile's attention, and this guy is just snapped up into its jaw, and this guy gets shaken until he rips apart in the air, and Herzog fires his bolter, hitting it, causing this thing to throw the remains of this soldier on the floor, and it turns its attention to him and snaps down on his leg and brings him down. And Grammaticus then steps forward and adjusts the ring on his hand, which is like a digital weapon gifted to him from the Cabal.
Correct.
And he triggers this, and a blue beam of light lances out and basically explodes this crocodile's brain. And this big wet blast of meat and bone and tissue goes flying out all over everybody. And with that, Grammaticus and Shay are able to help Herzog and escape the building across the bridge. And as they run out of another building onto the main street, they come across two more Astartes who are in a firefight with a gang of Nurthine soldiers. One of them is the one that was questioning Grammaticus earlier, and Herzog calls out his name, Peck, which Grammaticus takes a note of in his mind. And Peck tells them to get out of there. So they turn and run away from these gangs and the floods of lizards. Herzog's injured and limping.
Yeah.
We need to get somewhere safe, somewhere out of the city. And at that moment, Grammaticus and Shear both feel this ripple of psychoactivity in their stomachs. And then in front of them, the ground splits open, cobblestones burst into the air, and this giant monitor lizard hauls itself out of the ground in front of them. And it's like much bigger than the crocodilian that they just fought. And Grammaticus can see into its soul and just feels that it's got the absolute fury of a demon from pent up inside of it. So things are just going well for them. Herzog again starts firing his bolter at it, causing like blood to spew from it, smashing its teeth out. And this dragon like lunges in revenge, and Cher screams out and uses a pyrotechnic talent and shoots flames across the lizard, setting it on fire. And this beast then goes up in flames and panics and starts flailing around, smashing into buildings, setting them on fire, and falls down and eventually dies. And with that, they begin to run away. And while they're running through the chaos, Grammaticus loses sight of the others, but keeps running anyway.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the end of chapter 4.
Yeah, what's quite interesting about this chapter is actually we do get some answers, or no, maybe not some answers. We get some clues into some of the questions that have been asked. Obviously, for those that play on the tabletop, you'll have noticed that John carries one of the relics that you can give your characters, which is digital weapons. So any Marine players, you can normally add that as a relic to one of your commanders. So I'm sure those tabletop wise will be aware of it. I don't think it's available for Chaos or Nurgle, unfortunately, John. So it's something that tends to be Imperium only. So it was quite a nice touch because it links it back to the tabletop and stuff like that. So that's quite interesting. I think what's interesting about this chapter, so first of all, we find that obviously there's multiple different parties in play that are tracking and doing various different bits and pieces with the major players here. Grammaticus himself is, although he's like a master spy in this situation, he's not impervious to being manipulated, even if it's, he's trying to manipulate the situation. He's being manipulated himself, not by the Alpha Legion, who are also into manipulation. What's also interesting here is that we find this is the first time that we've got Alpha Legionnaires, Astartes from the Alpha Legion, that we're actually being able to identify them with names, as opposed to Alfarius. So that is quite interesting because it starts opening that up again. You go, okay, so they do have names, they do use those names, and because of John's innate abilities, he obviously can log and remember this, and that helps him start to identify various different troops as the book progresses.
Yeah, which is obviously it's going to help us more than anything. Try to pick people out as we go along. But it's strange, isn't it? Because he's set up to be this powerful character, but really at the minute he's not in control. Nowhere near as much control as he thought he was going to be in. And obviously his trip to Monlow Harbour has been a bit of a bust.
It's been a disaster.
So I think wrapping it up, we've had our introduction to, I think, our main characters. Obviously John, Bronzy, Sonica, and a couple of the Axors who we'll come back to. But everyone's spread to the wind at the minute, and it's all gone wrong for everybody. Questions and questions and questions. Lots of
questions, lots of answers that do come. You do get them, so it's not like you won't get anything. You will get these questions answered. It's just that you gotta wait for the payoff, as it were. But it is all about the continued subterfuge and the unknowing. So like all of this stuff's going on right now, and you almost have forgotten what's happened 2 chapters ago, where you've got Sonica and Bronzy who have been introduced to us, but we don't know what's happened to them. No. Like Visagers has been attacked, don't know what's happened to Sonica. Bronzy was off taking a cadaver away, gets interrupted, don't know what's happened to him. All we really know is that the Alpha Legion are in play on this planet in a sort of very subtle, stealthy, spy-like way. We don't know whether they're there officially to help the Imperial Guard, the Astra Militarum, or whether they're there for their own own ends. It's probably a little bit of both, but we'll find that out as it develops. And we also know that the Nurthine are very much in bed with the primordial annihilator. That's it. They've as time has gone on, for whatever reason, this human civilization has say not necessarily fallen to chaos, because it depends on how you judge chaos and where you sit on it. But they certainly worship these gods, and they do not, they are not going to comply with the imperial truth.
No, and I think that sums up everything we've learned pretty well for now.
Indeed.
So we look forward to coming back for part 2, and hopefully I think before we even start unwrapping anything, we're going to pile a lot more on, definitely in the next part. But it's going to, this book, it moves at such a pace that it feels like no time at all. But
Indeed.
Unless I've missed anything, I think we'll...
I was going to say, just the usual. Like, follow, subscribe, share with your mates. It's always helpful to get new people looking at the channel. And let us know what you think as well. Because, as I said, we're always trying to adapt, trying to change what we do to make it better. So let us know whether you like, how you find the long form that we do for these books. Because we're happy to keep doing it, but let us know how you're finding it.
Yeah, and let us know if the old PowerPoint was helpful. Typos aside, I'll double check before the next episode, I promise. Right, so that's goodbye from me then.
Goodbye from me. See you on the next one.
See you later.
As always, we would like to thank you for listening to our Iron and Ceramite podcast. If you liked us, then you can also find us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and any other good podcast services. Just remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war.